Okay, everyone. Good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you are in the country. My name is Kristen Garvey, and I am the president of NACW. I will turn on my video. Hello, everyone. And I want to welcome everyone to this webinar. It's such an interesting and vital conversation that we're going to have today. So we will be discussing what the current state of childcare is, especially during this incredibly stressful time. Speaking as a mother myself, I have a 7-year-old and trying to juggle everything that I have to juggle in my day job, as well as what she does during the school year and during summer has been challenging. And before I get started with the presentations with our very capable speakers, I wanted to just give a little information about NACW if you're not aware of what we do. So the mission of NACW is to sustain, strengthen, and advocate for women's commissions in their work to promote equality and justice for all women and girls and ensure they are represented and empowered in their communities. And the way that we do that, the way that we sustain our members is that we provide best practices and practical tools to help them fulfill their missions. We also develop expertise amongst our members and truly understand the unique needs and diverse environments that women's commissions find themselves in at the state, county, and local levels, as well as whether or not they're in a more receptive state or location or one that can sometimes provide a little bit of challenges. We also, the way that we strengthen our members is we offer opportunities to develop professional skills and obtain technical support, just like we're doing today. We also build relationships amongst our peers, and we work to form alliances with other national partners. And then to advocate for our members, we want to cultivate a national network of supporters. We want to promote public policies that support and inform our work. And we want to communicate the Women's Commission's value and tell the story on a national level. And so with that, I will introduce our speakers. So let's, and just very briefly say who they are, and then I will hand it over to them and let them work on who will be speaking first. So today we have Lori, is it Dix or Dickus?
It's Dickus. You're good. It's Dickus.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, sure.
And you are the chair of Clemson University Commission on the Status of Women, which I think is amazing that we are reaching out to the commissions at the universities. That's one area that we want to build our partnerships with, because we know that across the country, universities also have commissions for women. And then our other speaker today is Tanya Del Rio, who is the executive director of the Boston Mayor's Office of Women's Advancement.
Thanks for having me.
All right, so who would like to start?
Go ahead, Tanya, if you want. It doesn't matter. Go ahead, Tanya.
Okay. Should I just introduce I can introduce our strategy and then give everybody a little bit of an overview of our childcare strategy. And if there's questions, take them later, if that works. So,
yes.
Yeah?
Yes.
So our office didn't exist before the current mayor was in office. He turned what used to be in Boston a commission on the status of women into a city department, essentially. And so we've been around since that time. And the first few years of our office, we focused pretty much like laser focused on the issue of pay equity. And our work around childcare kind of was born out of the conversations that we had initially and with my predecessor about pay equity. We kept on hearing time and time again how the gender wage gaps for in kind of all of the occupations were in part due to the fact that women were either leaking out of the workforce or even if they stayed in the workforce, not reaching leadership positions. And, you know, knowing that women are perfectly capable of exercising leadership, we knew that there were more structural factors at play there. And childcare kept coming up time and again in those conversations as, well, not childcare, but the lack of access to affordable quality childcare kept coming up as a barrier that women face and that derails their careers or their professional lives. And so that's kind of how we came at it, but quickly learned once we started doing that research that an area that needed desperately attention also was the workforce of early education itself, which is in Boston, it's 90% female, 67% people of color, almost half are immigrants. And so this is a group of people that's doing extremely important work. The rest of the economy essentially is kind of resting on their labor and their work, and they're extremely undervalued, both in terms of the prestige afforded to their work and respect of them as professionals, but also in terms of their compensation, right? Which again, we go back to the gender wage gap, where we find that occupations that are predominantly filled by women, such as this one and others, are just consistently receiving lower compensation, no matter the importance or the value, the true value that they're actually providing. So we decided that this was an area that we really wanted to focus on for all of those reasons. And so you know, like the way we frame the problem, it's always really hard to talk about for us because it's so multifaceted and it affects so many people. You know, like we talk about the high cost to families, how the average cost of care for an infant can, you know, eat up 75% of a minimum wage earner's salary here in Massachusetts, which is wild. We talk about the fact that there's, you know, not enough government funding to cover the needs. So here we have almost 20,000 children on the wait list for subsidized childcare. And so those are people who are income eligible, are owed this service, and they're not receiving it because there's just not enough capacity and funding. I mentioned already the low pay for the workers. So in here, the median wage of an early childcare professional is about $27,000, and more than 1 in 3 are receiving public assistance. You know, they're living in public housing. And the last thing that I would mention, when just to describe the problem that we face here locally, but we know, and I'm sure Lori will talk about this, is kind of the same at the national level, is the shrinking pool of providers. So we have a little graph that we use to show the number of providers that we have here in the city. And we see that even though the population of children has grown by 40% in the last 10 years, just here in Boston, the number of center-based providers has remained the same for those 10 years. And if you look at the number of family childcare providers, it's declined tremendously. So we've lost more than half of those in the last years, which is why we decided to zero in on that population and concentrate our efforts in supporting the workforce that's doing family childcare, make sure they stabilize, they are able to stay open. They serve disproportionately lower income families, families that have non-standard schedules, and just provide an environment that a lot of families, as a matter of choice, just prefer. So we've been working with them, started small, still are small, but looking to scale. And yeah, so in a nutshell, like the role that we saw for the city, one was to use just innovative research and support best practices. So we've tried to fill a gap in terms of the data that's available about this field, especially in the area of family situations and family preference. So here in Boston, and again, I think this is a more widespread kind of situation, is that we have a ton of data about children 5 and up, right? Once they enter the school system, we know everything. We know their achievement gaps. We know a lot. But for children who are under 5, because there's no mandatory requirement to, you know, do any kind of care, we find that there's not a lot of information about what families, childcare and early education arrangements look like, and much less about their preference. Or, you know, like if we were able to one day solve this issue of lack of funding, if we were to build a system that's really a system and not a patchwork, well, what should we even build, right? Should we do something like what we have in K through 12? Should we pay people to stay at home if they want and care for their children? Or should we do a mix? Should we, you know, like have what we have and have a different patchwork of different arrangements? That's a question that I think we need to have more like as a society almost, and decide what it is that early education would look like. And I think just intuitively, I think the answer is we need a mixed delivery system, but that's publicly funded. So we want to advocate for that. So we've started to do that research both through large scale surveys like the city census. We've put an insert there, and also through smaller scale qualitative studies. Currently, we're doing a focus group around families' childcare preferences and plans related to COVID. So to understand who's going to go back to childcare and why not, and what that's going to look like, because right now providers and everybody in the field has a ton of questions about the future. So we're trying to get at that. And the second part of our strategy is supporting, like I said, the entrepreneurs. So our childcare entrepreneur fund program provides small grants for the family childcare, along with a number of workshops that teaches them business skills. This is a population that once we held, you know, hundreds of conversations with them before in order to design this, and learn that they're very confident in their abilities as educators, and they see themselves and identify as educators, not so much as business people. And that's the place where they felt less confident. So what we're providing, and it's just not required, right, in their licensing or professional development, the requirements. So we are kind of filling that gap too, and helping them understand how it is to what it's like to run your business, what you need to know, accounting, marketing, all of those skills they're acquiring. And we found that they find this to be really valuable. So yeah, like that's what we're focusing, and I'm happy to expand on any of these areas. We're doing data collection and analysis, engaging with the business community too, supporting the entrepreneurs, and just being really, I think this is the last thing I'll say for now, is we found that it's important to, even if our interventions on our work is nascent, and sometimes we may feel like small and a drop in the bucket is compared to the need, we want to be really communicative and loud about it, because this sector has been in crisis for decades, and it's just been a situation that we've come to live with, and you know, it's been normalized, and we want to change that. We want to make sure we raise the alarms as high as we can, and by showing that there are ways in which we can support this field, and in which we can reframe the conversation and really get people to believe and understand that this is important. This is something that should be a public good. Well, that's what we consider success. So we're doing the interventions, but at the same time consider that talking about the interventions in spaces like this, and as many places as will have us, is really part of the work. So thank you for the NACW for having us, and I'm looking forward to learning from you, Lori, and from the questions and from the audience.
Thanks, Tanya. That was great. And yes, I think a lot of these challenges are more universal. And I agree. Thank you, NACW, for having us. We appreciate it. And I'll shift and give a slightly different lens, even though I do think there's so many common threads here that there will be a lot of good things we can definitely learn from each other. So I want to share a little, can I share my screen, Kristen or Jill, or would you like to pull it up? Okay, thank y'all. Whoops, you don't need to see that though, do you? Hold on. Sorry, I had it pulled up. There we go. Okay. Apologies. Oh, here it is. I apologize. Okay. So, so I wanted to give y'all a little bit of a lens of the university's experience with childcare. And we've had a long and interesting history with childcare in related to the university as well as the community of Clemson itself. So just to give you a little context, because I wouldn't expect you all to know Clemson, South Carolina, or the university. That's a map of South Carolina, and you can see Clemson's up here in what we call the upstate near the mountains. And the city of Clemson itself is a small town. We have about 15,000 people, and the major employer is the university, even though we do have a few other manufacturing and service industries. One of the great parts about Clemson is that we have great access to large urban areas. So a couple hours from Charlotte, a couple hours from Atlanta, and an hour from Greenville. So we have really good access to major corridors. And it's a beautiful part of the state near the mountains. And Clemson, of course, has a long history as being one of the state anchor institutions, if you will. So in terms of some of the demographics, the median income of Clemson, of Pickens County, actually is lower than both the state as well as substantially lower than the nation. And similar to some of the things Tanya was talking about, we have a lot of people, especially staff members that work at the university as well as at some of the manufacturing plants, who would definitely qualify as low income, and definitely in more of the working poor category. So this issue of affordable, high quality childcare has been a problem and continues to remain one as well. An interesting fact of Clemson, though, is that our student population exceeds by quite a bit the population of the residents. So you can see that our student population is about 25,000 students, and the majority of those are full-time students and live in the area. So it's an interesting mix. Now we do have, I will say, we have a lot of graduate students at Clemson, as well as non-traditional undergrads, but who also are impacted by this childcare issue as well. So one thing to note, I talked with several of our colleagues on the Women's Commission who are in our early childhood education program at Clemson, who teach in that program. And in South Carolina in general, we have a lot of childcare, but the issue is quality childcare. And similar to what Tanya was saying, we have a diversity of family-run programs, especially in rural areas. And those programs often tend to be loosely regulated. Well, they're loosely regulated by DHEC in the state, as well as all the other programs. And we have a lot of private childcare facilities as well, many of which are faith-based when you look across the state. So one of our colleagues who is well known in early childhood education said, from her perspective, the issue is really the quality piece, as well as affordability. But in terms of childcare, there's a lot of different types of childcare in the state. Now, Clemson, South Carolina, however, we have struggled with having enough childcare for the population of the community for many, many years. And so that's why this has been an issue for the University Women's Commission. And so let me give kudos to all the women who have come before me and worked on the Women's Commission, because different women, mostly women leaders, have been advocating for this issue for over 45 years at the university. So this has been a long running and persistent challenge. And so I give them so much credit for leading the way and keeping their feet to the fire, if you will, on this issue. So the University Women's Commission, though, is the oldest commission on campus, and similar to NACW, the Women's Commission at Clemson's charge is to discern the status of women at Clemson and to document findings, to remove institutional barriers, to conduct research, to basically improve the quality of life and opportunities for faculty, staff, and students, women, faculty, staff, and students at Clemson University. So that has been our focus. And as I said, we are one of the oldest commissions. We are the oldest commission on campus. So the issue of childcare has been ongoing, as I said, for decades at the university. And it continued to meet with a lot of resistance, even though in particular, the Women's Commission has continued to advocate for it. We're not the only ones who have advocated for it. The first attempt that got us the closest was one in 2005, 2009, and it was led by the provost of the university at the time. And there was momentum there, and we felt positive that something may happen. But unfortunately, the Great Recession that we all, I'm sure, remember, intervened, and there were major budgetary limitations that prevented that. So that fell flat. Then the Women's Commission continued to raise this issue as a primary barrier for women, both not just women affiliated with the university, but women in the community who were working in the community. So a resolution came up that was signed by the Commission on the Status of Women, Commission on the Status of Black Faculty and Staff, Faculty Senate, Staff Senate. You can see Graduate Student Government, Office of Access and Equity. So it's continuing to rise to the top of many different agendas at the university, and that was in 2012. So similar to what Tanya is saying, one of the things the Women's Commission has continued to work towards in collaboration with other groups on campus is collecting data and documenting the issues and making sure that we can bring the most current data and status of these issues to the executive leadership and powers that be. So in November 2012, a survey of faculty, staff, and graduate students found that childcare was a significant issue. And one of the things that has actually been quite helpful, I think, for the Women's Commission's case is that Clemson has been working very hard to improve its academic rankings. And we were the only university in the top 25 that did not have on-campus childcare. And at the time, Clemson was working very diligently to be in the top 20. We've relatively recently been ranked an R1 university, which is a top tier research university. And similarly, that metric illustrates that the childcare issue we have been behind the ball on. So we continue to kind of slug forward, and the Women's Commission finally had a group that was willing to really put some more, I guess, volunteer effort behind this issue. And so decided to tackle a business plan for on-campus childcare as a goal for that academic year. And that was, of course, based on all this prior research. And I believe one of my colleagues who actually was the chair of the child care committee at that time, Julia Brugamahin, is on the call, and she has worked very diligently to continue to move this forward. And so we were fortunate enough to have a national company work with us to develop a business plan for an on-campus child development center. And as such, we presented that plan to our executive leadership team, the president and the provost, in the fall of 2014. So, excuse me. So what were the barriers up until that point? Up until that point, what we found was that there was very low support from upper administration for a whole variety of reasons. It was considered too expensive. It was not a priority compared to many other projects and objectives. It had a low support from our board of trustees, which approves these types of things. And this is something that for those of you that are in state or city offices may have some understanding of. These kinds of big projects that come through a university in some states have to be approved by state budget boards because Clemson is a public institution. So we had to have all plans approved by 3 different state committees. So anything we did, we knew there were substantive barriers. And add all of that, on top of all of that, the Women's Commission is a volunteer group on campus. So we all have, if you will, full-time jobs And we care a lot about women's issues and barriers to inclusion. And so we're all have limited time, little resources or no financial resources. And we all have our own expertise, but it is often not childcare. So there have been a lot of barriers and challenges, but we continue to persist. And I'll talk more about this state restriction in a minute, but that has been an issue as well. So how have we built the case for change? Because we have success is coming our way. We use national statistics. We compared ourselves to other institutions, which has been incredibly important. We continue to energize campus support, widespread campus support. And I would say not just campus support, but community support from the perspective that there has been a lack of good childcare in Clemson, or just childcare in general, but good childcare and affordable childcare. So we have worked with men, women, faculty, staff, students, across the board to try to ensure that this remains a priority. The Women's Commission and a whole range of different women and men were willing to take risks and to take leadership around this issue. And so we continued to persist and fight for childcare and advocate for it strongly. So what happened? We were very fortunate that the stars aligned. So 2014, if you recall, we present this business plan in the fall of 2014 that the Women's Commission had worked on. Julia Bruggemaheen and others had worked diligently for. And we had just installed our president, President Clements, who continues to be the president of Clemson. And he came to a meeting of the Commission on Women. And we relayed this issue and talked about how long it had been at the top of our agenda. And he said, we're going to make it happen. And so a lot of balls started rolling. There have been some bumps in the road for sure, but we have gotten there. So in 2014 and 2015, we were able to get the architectural plans and a feasibility study. We had a little bump in 2016, but all of the phases have been approved, and the Child Care Center opens to students this fall, and this is what it looks like. So it's hard to see, but it's an awesome facility. We just took a tour the other day. It will open this fall with a reduced load. As Tanya mentioned about infants and toddlers, not surprisingly, infants and toddler room is already full. Those rooms are already full, and that continues to be a challenge in all communities around the state of South Carolina as well. So we're thrilled. The maximum enrollment of the Child Care Center will be 143 children from 6 weeks to 5 years old. And one of the big things that has continued to stay at the top of our radar is this quality issue. So all along, the goal was that this would be NAEYC accredited, and this would be the only NAEYC accredited center that's not a Head Start center in the area. We do not have a lot of NAEYC accredited centers, in the state. We chose a third-party provider. This, of course, will be highly subsidized by the university. It will be largely focused on faculty, staff, and students, but will have community access as well. So we're super excited about it. We're feel very lucky that we've gotten to this point. However, luck, it's way more than luck. People have worked long and hard and been diligent and persistent to continue to work towards this important goal. Kind of some lessons that we've learned. I mean, there's so many, but timing and leadership changes were critical. Some doors opened, and the work that the Women's Commission had done and been doing allowed for not just the Women's Commission, but others to really be able to advocate for this important public service. The persistence, the planning, and we continued to build and reinforce the case as things changed at the university, which was super important. And as I said, there have been a lot of bumps in the road related to reasons why the university didn't want to do this, barriers, and I'm happy to answer questions about any of those. I could belabor a lot of that, but I wanted to give you this overview of our story. And I will say that one thing that the Women's Commission is talking about and working on right now are some of the issues that were raised by Kristen in the introduction. And that is that we recognize and we know that right now, COVID is creating a whole nother set of barriers for women. And while childcare, this childcare center is certainly going to help many women, one of our concerns is that this crisis is going to set so many women back professionally, faculty, staff. We see it in all different types of ways in the university setting. So that's a current topic on our radar, and one that we're continuing to talk about and hope to have some programming on throughout this year. But there's a lot of research, and I'm sure some of you have read some of this that's coming out about the inequitable distribution of impacts in COVID in a whole variety of ways. And one is on women and the care and provision of services that they're providing. So with that, I will say thank you so much for having me. I'm happy to answer any questions and appreciate y'all's time. I'll stop sharing.
What a win. Congratulations.
Thanks. We're super excited. It's a beautiful facility too. It's really nice. Yeah.
Yeah, so I wonder, I don't know, for the NACW staff and friends who are hosting us, if we should answer questions now, ask each other questions. I'm sure interested, but
yeah. So if anybody
mean,
has any questions, you can either submit your questions in the Q&A box or the chat box. I believe Jill is monitoring those. Or if anybody would like to raise their hand, if that's possible in this format. Hi, Jill. Do you have any questions?
I might toss out the first question. I would love to know from the both of you, considering the crisis of the moment, what do you think might be possible now that and I want to be very clear, and Tanya referred to this earlier, this has been a crisis for a long time. It simply has a brighter spotlight. And so I am curious about how you think that brighter spotlight might help long-term goals, or perhaps in some ways might negatively impact long-term goals.
Good question. I was thinking about that today, actually. Tanya, you got any good responses?
I mean, I tend to think that it helps. I mean, I don't know. It's hard. I think a lot of people who weren't knowledgeable or like understood the problem before this are now being forced to, because they themselves might be going home and kind of be faced with childcare responsibility that they didn't have before by the virtue of all the centers and so many other providers closing. So I think that has helped kind of generally just raise awareness, and I hope brought more people into the fold about thinking that this is an important issue to work on. I mean, and we saw yesterday actually how Congress, bipartisan, decided to pass $50 billion to support the industry. And I believe that's the largest kind of funding that's come this way for a long time, if not ever. So I think that signals progress to me, or I see that as positive. That being said, I mean, it's still far from being settled, and it's still far from being considered a public good, or this is kind of it's a large Band-Aid, welcome Band-Aid, but it's still a Band-Aid. So I think we need to keep pushing. I mean, for me, I tend to see these things as like, you probably get one chance to do something really big every once in a while, because COVID is so big, and so many new legislation and support systems have come online because of COVID. I think while this was big, we still may have a chance to still do something big even sooner right after, because just the size of the crisis that we are facing now. So I think it's a good thing. I think more people are aware, but I think that's a reason to keep up the advocacy and keep up the work.
Yeah, I think I concur with that. Overall, I'm very positive about the light that this shines on a lot of gaps that exist in kind of our social structure. We know from, to be the nerdy academic that I am, we know from research in other countries, like especially the Baltic countries and other EU countries, right, that this kind of support for childcare, when we think of it like a public good, actually helps all families, but also helps support women to stay in the workforce longer, and for families to make the choices that work best for them, both personally and financially long term. So, you hope that things like this shine a light for us to make some of those big changes that Tanya was talking about. And I am hopeful that we will start to see some momentum around, reframing how we view broad-based childcare, not just early childhood, but also, think about all of these women that have, young children at home in elementary school or middle school, and they're trying to work full-time remotely, and they need some type of help, even if it's for a few hours, So I think there's all kinds of variations on what kind of support we might be able to envision. My only negative would be that I worry that the financial implications of this crisis allow other things to distract us away from something that is a long-term investment like this. Because this is a long-term investment that will pay off, I would argue, for generations to come, this kind of investment.
Yeah, I think I would just add kind of the piece about the importance of women kind of doing the work like Lori has been, and myself, Jill, probably everybody here on this call, on issues that affect and hit women harder. The fact that we're now seeing more and more women having access to positions of authority, like for example, I don't think it's a coincidence that we're seeing childcare miraculously emerge in the conversation during the presidential campaign. It wouldn't have happened if we hadn't had so many women candidates talking about it. And I'm very happy that now it's just become part of the conversation, and we can acknowledge that this is a campaign issue, and it's important for everyone, and it's not just something to be talked about in women's groups, right? So I think the more women step into into those spaces and advocate for the things that affect us personally directly and that we care about, I think the more we're going to be able to make progress on like this and so many other issues that people have thought weren't important enough to include in the conversation.
I think that's an excellent point that you make, Tanya. So thank you for being intentional about calling that out, that leadership matters and that women's representation in leadership really does matter. Lori mentioned it during her remarks that one of the key factors in terms of them shifting from planning to execution was leadership. Would you both be willing to speak about the process of building allies? I think it's great if someone comes to the work with a personal experience or can relate in a personal way, but I think it's also really important that we are effectively making the case to folks where it hasn't yet been normalized as part of their experience and their participation in a public sphere. Tanya, do you want to go first, and then we'll go to Lori?
Sure. I would say that part of the work is extremely difficult, but extremely necessary. So the process I normally go through, and I will take advice and input on whether there's a better way, but I normally find allies first and then build, because it's just sometimes that much, it's just easier or more doable. So I will try to go out and find people that already kind of agree that this is something to look at, and that might have access to rooms that I don't have access to, or that might be listened to in a different way. So if I find male colleague that already cares, if I find, you know, like people who are in different circles than me or my staff would be, that for some reason mention it or have heard it, you know, like if it comes up, or I learned that this is something that is close to their heart, I try to get in touch with those people really quickly, have those conversations, and then make the ask that they not only, you know, personally support, but that then they sponsor or champion this issue, and try to have conversations with people that maybe don't know about it or haven't really considered it, haven't given it that much thought. I haven't met too many people that, you know, are against children or that think we should not care for them, but there is kind of a narrative out there about children, and yeah, and childcare and early education being a topic of personal responsibility, and people saying, well, you know, you chose to have children, so figure it out. That was a choice. And I think that's it's harder to persuade people that already have a strong feeling that this is kind of the way that we should talk about this. I mean, I do, if I have a conversation, like and I do sometimes, I would always talk about like about the issue from an economic perspective. So it is a women's issue, it is a children's issue, but it's also an economic issue, right? Like companies and all employers are going to need a workforce in the future. Like people retire, and we know that generations that follow the baby boomers have less people in them. So we do need to kind of also be able to pivot and talk about this as an economic issue, because that's the way to get some people on board. But that being said, I think what you need to move something forward is a critical mass, right? You don't need to convince absolutely everybody. So yeah, you find your allies, and then you yourself and these allies will help you build broader support. And I mean, Jill, you're an expert at building coalitions, and we could probably all learn from you about this, and because you've done it so many times. So if, like I said, if
Oh, you just muted yourself, Tanya.
Oh, just sorry. If people have ideas about this topic, I would be very interested in learning from you, because it's not easy work.
I would agree with that. Building allies, I think, is really hard work. And I think what I have understood about the trajectory of the Women's Commission and this particular issue at Clemson is kind of a steady approach to trying to build allies and develop support, and at times having to reframe the issue, as Tanya mentioned. So, so just to give you a little more backstory, you know, Clemson is a land grant school and used to be an all male school. So we already started out an all male school, land grant school, so highly agriculture, highly engineering oriented, wasn't integrated and, you know, fully co-ed, well, and segregation is a whole nother separate story, but wasn't co-ed, I believe, until the late 50s or 60s. I'm don't hold me to that. But so we already start out with that. And then we have a board of trustees that has historically, you know, not been well represented from a diversity perspective. So those already start out as kind of baggage at Clemson in terms of being able to make the case for something like this. So over time, I would say the Women's Commission has been very persistent about making sure that it continues to build support and a case for these kinds of not just women's issues, but family issues that matter to both men and women affiliated with the campus. I would say, you know, we didn't make as much traction, though, as Tanya was mentioning, until we did have more women representation, both in terms of leadership positions, as well as, so leadership positions, both in faculty and staff, as well as, you know, especially more tenure track women faculty. So as that has happened, we have been able to make more traction as we have gained more women and men allies who have maybe a voice that we can take up the chain of command. And that's why in 2005 to 8 range, we had a female provost at the time at Clemson, and we were making traction. We were making headway. Furthermore, as the Board of Trustees has changed and we have women representation on the board, as well as a bit more diversity than we've had in the past, we have been able to find maybe more direct allies of support. With that said, also though, over time, we invite men to be on the commission, and we have had men on the commission, and we welcome that. And many of those men have been very important allies for us. However, I will say that I'm sure there's still BOT members, Board of Trustees members, that don't think we should be in the business of childcare. And they said that for many, many years. We should not be in the business of childcare. And I'm sure there's probably a few left. But what we could say to at least start to build a case that was maybe different than the way we had presented it in the past was that, if Clemson wants to be a top tier R1 university, we have to compete. We have to compete with other institutions that are doing this. You cannot attract the best and brightest scientists if you do not have access to high quality childcare. If you're moving from a state that has highly accredited childcare facilities in it, and you have to move to a state that doesn't have any, or few, I shouldn't say any, because we do have some, or certainly doesn't have them in Clemson, then that might be a detractor. That could be a thing. So the economics of it is also important too. I agree with you, Tanya, that just making sure that you have the capacity to ensure that your community members can stay fully employed if they choose to be is important too. But I do think, similar to you, Tanya, it's been kind of a slow, steady, find people that are your immediate allies and build from there. And then also determining how you need to frame the argument. The argument may need to be framed and presented a little bit differently than the way that you might normally think about it. I mean, it seems obvious to us. But
has this lived experience for many of us, right?
Right.
And so I think that is a really excellent point. I so appreciate what both of you are saying, the different perspectives that you're bringing. I also want to make sure that we're leaving space for our participants to ask questions. So I have been keeping an eye on the chat as well as the Q&A tab. If folks want to speak up, make sure that you are either raising your hand or dropping a note into one of those two folders. I'm going to ask one more question, and then I will be quiet and really make people uncomfortable by not, participating in this really interesting discussion. But both of you have talked about data and talked about that as a persuasive tool. I think both of you have mentioned the economics of the situation. Lori, my ear caught, or I sort of heard you say, like, as we think about moving through COVID or recovering from COVID, we're very interested in how women and folks that represent or identify as women are going to be impacted differently because of either the COVID virus or the recovery. So I would love for you to talk just a little bit more about, using data and using it, using the data around economics as a persuasive argument to move folks effectively.
Well, I'll give you one example really quick, because I was on the committee that was looking at the tuition issue for our childcare facility. And so one of the things that we did is, and I say this was a committee, and our CFO's office collected a lot of data on average childcare prices in the state, and then by city in the state, and then just looking at our county. And then though, what we did, of course, is we looked at average income, but then we broke down, this was actually quite fascinating. We broke down the number of employees at Clemson who made different salary bands, right? So, up to 30,000, 30 to 50,000, that kind of thing. That was very, very, all of that information was incredibly important to determining what the price that we would encourage the childcare provider to charge. And then, but also what's really important about this is that impacted the subsidy that Clemson would have to provide, right? Because it's meant to be a benefit. And we know that childcare in these types of situations, you know, are subsidized. I mean, that's just the way it is, right? And so, so there was a group of us that really culled through that data to really think hard about, well, you know, if you have, and I'm just making this up, this is not what the data said, I don't have it in front of me, but if you have a substantial percentage of your employees that make under $60,000 and childcare, as Tanya was talking about, you know, is $1,000 a month, you know, you need to think long and hard about what that cost structure might need to look like to ensure that that everyone has access to that childcare. So we had a lot of debates and discussions about whether we should have a tiered structure based on income, whether we should have you know, scholarships and not a tiered structure. We had a lot of conversations about how do we ensure that there is equitable access for all faculty, staff, and community members. And the data helped us get there. And it was, you know, really, it was both state data, but as well national data as well, to figure out, you know, if we should do a tiered structure and that kind of thing. So that's kind of getting in the weeds, but all along we've used data like that. So it's helped us then take the case to whomever, the Board of Trustees or the state, as to what we will be doing as we move that forward. I hope that answered the question.
I would just add that for us, especially during COVID, data has been key, and we've built a good partnership that, you know, it was good before, but now it's actually very like strong and systematized with the state to share data so that we can understand what's going on during the emergency and try to preview what's going to happen in the coming months, and understand where we need to be providing support, especially in our work with providers. So just to share some data points, when we went through the emergency, we started out with about 100 children on day one in Boston, children of emergency essential workers, using the state's free emergency childcare programs. That over time came up to about 350 using this service. And we would monitor this daily, right, along with the state, and have conversations to see where we would need, if we would need to add capacity, or where we had extra capacity, like what to do with the providers, and how to guide them through, well, you know, staying open with no children, which happened, which is a better problem than not having enough providers, to be honest. But we went through that, and now we've pivoted into trying to understand what's going on in the reopening. So at least in Boston, I don't know what it's like in other places, we've seen about a little bit more than 60% of our programs have reopened as of now. So we've recovered a little bit less than half of our capacity. The kind of the curve has slowed. So we fear that we might have really lost between 20, 30, possibly more of our 20-30% of our providers and our capacity. But we also understand that demand might be down temporarily. So that's what we're working on, trying to understand, to help the providers decide whether they can remain open, or if that's going to be able to work, if the families are going to come back. And I think that's very important, because providers don't have the capacity to be monitoring this data, but they definitely have a need to understand the larger context. So we try to provide that for them and for the city at large. And I think it's been a very interesting and very, you know, worthy kind of effort from the team.
Thank you so much for that, Tanya. I appreciate you sharing that information. I just realized that I perhaps did not introduce myself when I jumped right into questions, because I was so enthusiastic about hearing more. So my name is Jill Ash, and I serve as the Executive Director at the Massachusetts Commission on the Status of Women. I also serve as the Vice President of the NACW. And so it's a real pleasure to be here today with Tanya and Lori, and I'm grateful for their contribution. We do have a couple questions that I'm trying to sneak in Before I do that, I want to thank Tanya. I saw that she dropped a few bits of information into the chat. Lori, if you have documents that you can share with the group, I know that that would be appreciated. And then to participants, if you guys have, or if you folks, excuse me, have resources that you are excited about sharing, feel free to include it in the chat. I am so excited to take a question from one of my commissioners who's helping to lead the work around early education care and schooling. She asked, we know that quality childcare is important to the development of young children. Long term, the educational deficits can be significant for children who do not receive these important services. Is this issue part of the advocacy you propose? Such a great question. Thank you, Jean.
Yes, that's true from Clemson's perspective, because all along the idea was that it would be a nationally accredited child care center, and so that it would meet standards that superseded potentially state level standards. And the state uses a quality counts, I believe is what it's called. And there's nothing wrong with that, but these NACE accredited standards is my understanding is they supersede those standards. And they also do manage, or they do deal with things like this question in the chat box, wage structure for childcare workers and education and professional development for the workers, as well as benefits for the employees as well, for the childcare employees. So yes, and I will say that one of the things, and some of you may know this, but childcare centers at universities are sometimes affiliated with departments. They're sometimes affiliated with departments or colleges of education. That was that is not true at Clemson. It is not considered a lab school. Our College of Education will, I'm sure, be engaging with the Child Care Center. In fact, the director of the Child Care Center is a former Clemson graduate from our early childhood program. But this is not a formal lab school. And there's a whole bunch of reasons behind that, mostly financial. I'm happy to talk about that at a different time. But so the quality all along has been front and center for us.
Tanya, do you have a thought on this, or shall I take the next question? I don't want to move on before.
Yeah, I was making faces because you cut off when you were reading it. So if you
Oh, I'm sorry.
It's okay.
Here, let me read it again because it's such a great question. We know that quality childcare is important to the development of young children. Long term, the educational deficits can be significant for children who do not receive these important services. Is this issue part of the advocacy you propose?
Yeah, I'll give it a short answer, like absolutely yes. And not only is it important for children, it becomes a question of equity, right? Because when we have, let's say we have universal access to childcare, but not all of it is quality, then it's creating a disadvantaged group from the very beginning, which you can then see have an effect on people's lives for a long time. And so for us, they go together, and we don't ever talk about affordable childcare or access to childcare. We always talk about access to affordable quality childcare, and however long the phrase is, we always make sure to say it that way, and that's the reason why.
Yeah, I think that is such an important point in terms of quality, affordable. I even go so far as to say accessible quality childcare.
Yeah.
Because I think that there are all these barriers to quality, affordable, accessible childcare, and we need to be able to be explicit about that and name it. I think one of the other, and I'm going to lead into our last question. Thanks everyone for hanging out a little bit longer with us. I think one of the things that's really interesting to me and a challenge as we're trying to figure out how to solve the problem is that we have these separate constituencies, right? We're really interested and engaged with equitable access to early education. And we also know that the workforce, which is providing care and education to our young folks, is overwhelmingly women. And we know that the impact of providing child care and education in the moment of COVID is falling unequitably on women in their homes. So this leads me to the last, I think that is a really interesting thing to acknowledge, and we need to make sure that we are recognizing those separate constituencies as we're trying to solve problems. If we solve problems for only one, we're going to fall short in our work. So last question, and again, thanks for sticking with me. We have, do childcare workers receive a living wage, and do they receive health care or retirement benefits? So I think, Lori, you maybe answered this in the chat, but I would love for you to address it quickly here sort of for the group as well.
Oh, sure. I'm sorry. So Bright Horizons is our childcare provider, and some of you may be familiar with them. They're a national provider, but they have worked a lot with universities. And so when we issued the RFP, they had a lot of experience. To be honest, one of our concerns was we got pushback from some of the community providers when it became clear that Clemson was doing this, because there was concern that with a provider like this, that was going to be NACE accredited, those providers would lose employees. So there was concern that it was going to be, create a competitive environment with an already shortage of labor supply, if you will. Because, and Bright Horizons is, from my understanding, has competitive wages and provides benefits. I do not know the full scope of those benefits, but yes. So we're pleased about that. And I do know actually they did take some employees from other childcare providers. I heard that just the other day. So yeah.
Well, thank you all so much. I think I hope that we've grabbed all the questions from the attendees. I believe we have, so I haven't lost, no one's missed the opportunity to speak if they wanted to speak. If a question occurs to you after we say goodbye, please feel free to reach out. I know most of us come to this work with an eagerness to connect with other folks. So I would be very pleased to facilitate a connection, and I imagine that Tanya and Lori would be interested in continuing the conversation, if you will. So I'm going to turn it back over to Kristen if she's available, just to say final thanks and goodbye. Kristen?
Okay, I think I got it. Thank you all for participating in this very informative and very interesting conversation about something that is so vital to women in general. And I hope that we will continue to have sessions like this that we can offer to our members, so that we can bring these important issues to everyone. And again, thank you, Tanya, thank you, Lori, for taking the time out. And I think that's it, unless there's something else, Jill, you would like me to cover.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much, everyone. Stay safe and well. We appreciate your time.
All right, thank you so much, everyone. Have a good evening and a good weekend.
You too. Thanks so much, everybody. Good to meet you
All right.
all.